We've seen 4 down linemen for years here in the Washington defense, but under new defense coordinator Joe Whitt Jr., I'd expect to see 2 or even 3 down linemen for the majority of the time. But that doesn't mean we won't see 5 men on the line of scrimmage. That and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, David Harrison, credential member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for CommanderGameDay.com. And I'm here with you every Monday through Friday. Greatly appreciate you coming through today, everydayers. Greatly appreciate you coming through every single day. This is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders. And if you haven't already, you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to this podcast. Shout out to everybody who is subscribed to the channel on YouTube. Over 9,000 subscribers. We hit that over the weekend. Super pumped for that. Super appreciative for everybody and the support that you guys have shown me throughout the years that we've been here on YouTube. Audio audience, you're the OGs. That's where we started. That's where we thrive. You know I love you as well. On today's episode, we are going deep on the defensive line group, and that includes interior defensive linemen. It includes the edge rushers. So a little bit of multitude of things that we're going to talk about on today's episode. But first, we're going to start with Joe Whitt Jr.'s scheme, because how he schemes up his defense is going to determine a lot how this defense looks. And of course, how that defense looks is going to be a little bit different than what we're used to here in Washington. If you want to discuss anything we talk about here, anything else Washington Commanders related, all you got to do is reach out and send me a text message. You can do that by becoming a Locked On Commanders Insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders and become a Locked On Commanders Insider. You'll get text messages from me, answers to your questions, conversation, bonus content, news analysis, live texting from games, practices, and press conferences, all without any apps, no hashtags, no filters, just you and me talking Washington Commanders. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. So visit FanDuel.com to get started today. So while we've gotten pretty used to seeing 4-man fronts here in Washington from the defense, 4 down linemen, that is, I think it's going to be time to start getting used to seeing 2 or even 3 down linemen, but not a whole lot of 4 down linemen. However, even though we're not going to have as many down linemen, you actually might see more players, linemen, if you want to call them that, edge defenders, outside linebackers. There's a lot of terminology here, but you're going to see more players on the line of scrimmage on a per snap basis, I believe. And that is diving into Joe Whitt Jr.'s scheme here. And again, we've yet to see his full scheme unrolled. So some of this is based off of what we have seen in practices, which we have seen a little bit. We've seen some install, things like that. And some of this is going to be based off historical data. Some of this is just going to be straight up assumption by yours truly here hosting this episode. So grain of salt time, right? We've only got about 7 practices under our belt to really go off of, but to give a little more holistic view of the defensive line, I felt like it was kind of necessary to put it in the context of the scheme. So here's how we're going to come up with what we expect from Joe Whitt Jr. And we start off by looking at his coaching history. Specifically, we're looking at periods from 2021 to 2023, when he was the Dallas Cowboys defensive pass game coordinator and secondary coach under then defensive coordinator Dan Quinn, who of course is now the head coach here in Washington, brought Joe Whitt Jr. along to be the defensive coordinator of his defense. In 2020, Joe Whitt Jr. and Dan Quinn were also together in Atlanta, and Joe Whitt Jr. was the Atlanta Falcons defense pass game coordinator and secondary coach. In 2019, Joe Whitt was with the Cleveland Browns in the same position, defense pass game coordinator and secondary coach. And then all the way in 2018, he was the Packers defensive game coordinator, defense pass game coordinator, I should say, for the Green Bay Packers. That's not the full extent of his coaching history, but that's as far as we're going to dive into this. And what we are going to notice here is specific trends, right? With the Dallas Cowboys, specifically that last season in 2023, the Cowboys were in 2 or 3 down lineman looks 93% of the time. 2020 with the Atlanta Falcons, 2 or 3 down lineman looks 54% of the time. 2019 is the outlier. 28% of the time they were in 3 down lineman looks. The rest of the time they were actually in 4 down lineman looks. So that is the outlier. 2018, though, you go to the Green Bay Packers, you go back up 99% of the time with the Green Bay Packers defense in 2 or 3 down lineman looks. So Joe Whitt Jr.'s history, where he has come from, predominantly 2 or 3 down lineman looks. Also single high safety, 52% single high safety in Green Bay, 54% single high safety in 2019 with the Browns, 2020 with the Falcons, 65%, final season in Dallas, 53%, and then having 4 or more pass rushers, 96% of the time in 2023. In 2020 in Atlanta, it was 91% of the time. 2019 in Cleveland, 96% of the time. 2018 in Green Bay, 86% of the time. So clearly what to expect from a Joe Whitt Jr. led defense, just based off of where he's come from, where he has been a pass game coordinator, where he has been a position coach. I'm going to expect 2 or 3 down linemen the majority of the time, over 50%. I would probably say over 70%. I don't know if I would go as high as to the 90s. I do think we're going to see 4 down linemen sprinkled in there more than some of those 99%, 96%ers that we see in his history. But I do say I would say at least 70% of the time, I would expect the Washington Commanders to be in a 2 or 3 down lineman look. More single high coverage than 2, but that's not going to be an incredible slant either way. I think you're going to get a fairly good mix of single high safety coverage, 2 high shells, and all those things. And then 4 or more players moving forward to the snap just about every time they snap the ball. So what's really interesting in a defense like this, and why I prefer this type of defense, we talk about like base defenses, I prefer the 3-4 or the 3-3-5 more than I prefer the 4-3, because typically NFL teams like to rush at least 4 players. Sometimes they like to rush even 5 or 6. The most crazy of them all, looking at Utah Bulls and Tampa Bay, we'll rush 7 from time to time, but typically you're wanting to rush at least 4. Well, if you have 4 down linemen, traditionally, most often, your 4 rushers are going to be those 4 down linemen. That's what we saw out of Jack Del Rio. It's what we saw out of Ron Rivera here the last few years, is a lot of the 4-man rushing. We're the 4 down linemen. They're there. They're identified. The O-line knows exactly where they are from snap to finish. And it kind of hinders the creativity unless you have some really superior athletes on the edge who can drop off and you can replace them with a linebacker or a blitzing safety or a blitzing corner, things like that. And I'm not necessarily saying that Montez Sweat and Chase Young predominantly, obviously they were the dominant 2 defensive ends during that time, right? I'm not saying they're not athletic enough or capable enough to drop off into coverage more than we saw them and for them to be replaced, but the scheme just didn't call for it. So not creative at all. But with this unit, when you're talking about bringing 4 or more pass rushers on pretty much every single snap, and you're only lining up with 2 or 3 down linemen pretty much every single snap, it means the offensive line is always going to be challenged. The opposing quarterback is always going to be challenged to find that other rusher. Who's the other guy coming? Who are the other 2 guys coming? Because it's not always going to be the guy standing up on the line of scrimmage. Because as we're going to talk about as we get deeper into this, just because you only have 2 or 3 down linemen doesn't mean you only have 2 or 3 guys on the line of scrimmage. And that's where we'll get a little bit more creativity from this defense. So looking at just the interior defensive line, I think with the roster that you have, there's a lot of room for creativity here. When you go 2 down linemen, Jer'Zhan Payne and Jonathan Allen clearly are going to be kind of that favorite combo duo for a lot of people for a good reason. You can shift them inside. You can bunch them inside. You can spread them out and leave the linebackers with the opening. In the middle there, you put one at the nose, like Jer'Zhan Payne, and put Jonathan Allen, say, in a 3-tech. Or, I mean, you could even put Jonathan Allen over the nose if you really wanted to, and put Jer'Zhan Payne off to the side. So just some creativity options. Jer'Zhan Payne and Johnny Newton, the rookie out of Illinois. Granted, we haven't seen him practice yet because he's still recovering from that second foot surgery, but that brings a lot of intrigue. Jonathan Allen and John Ridgeway, or Fedarian Mathis, or Benning Potai, like who that 4th D tackle is going to be, really kind of up in the air. I think John Ridgeway, in my book, would have the lead there because of just performance. Fedarian Mathis largely because of injuries, not really his fault, but it is what it is. I would put him behind John Ridgeway. Benning Potai, obviously, really solid dude, but kind of pulling up the rear end of the defense tackles there. Could even see Johnny Newton spelling Jer'Zhan Payne, John Allen and John Ridgeway swapping out from time to time. Remember, Coach Whitt had that line right about not having just 11 starters, but having a whole bunch of guys. So I think a lot of rotations. Again, you could see Newton and Allen on the field at the same time. You see Payne and Ridgeway on the field at the same time. Hell, you could even see Newton and Ridgeway on the field at the same time. So a lot of good, interesting combos. 3 down linemen, Allen, Payne, and I think Dorrance Armstrong would be the next guy with his hand in the dirt. Allen, Payne, and Farrell if you're in a run-heavy system or situation. Allen, Payne, and Newton, the rookie, if you want to go a little bit bigger but get a little bit of speed on the field with Johnny Newton. Newton, Allen, and Payne with Newton at the nose. Like that's something that he did in college. It'd be interesting to see what he could do in the pros. Like I kind of look at Johnny Newton as almost like a Kalijah Cansey type of player who went to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last year at a Pitt, and they put him at the nose in certain looks, and it worked out pretty well. Fedarian Mathis or John Ridgeway, along with Jonathan Allen and Jer'Zhan Payne as well. You get a little bit of a meteor 3 down lineman front, and that opens things up. Again, like I said, you can have guys standing up on the outside of them, and you can do all those things. But how do we evaluate these players? I think this depth chart is a little bit kind of obvious in the setting, right? John Allen, Jer'Zhan Payne, obviously, are going to be the 1 and the 2. Johnny Newton, you presume, if he's healthy, is going to be the 3. Really, that 4th spot is really where we start to have questions with Fedarian Mathis John Ridgway, and Benning Potsai. And then we've got some other guys competing, but I think that's really kind of a 3-horse race, and really probably a 2-horse race between Ridgway and Mathis, if we're being completely honest. So how do we evaluate these guys as we get through these practices, we get into training camp? What are the coaches going to be looking for as they determine who's going to end up getting the play time that these players so desperately covet? Well, we'll get down into defensive line, interior defensive line evaluations coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. You love sports. That's why we're both here. We love them so much, we never want them to stop. But as the NBA and NHL playoffs wind down, we get fewer games. Baseball is still going, but it's pretty much the only game really still going. And the sports aren't sporting like we want them to every single day. But FanDuel lets us keep on sporting whenever we want the sports to do whatever we want them to do. All you got to do is open the app, dream up your bets anytime you're in the mood, and then FanDuel will take care of the rest. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up every customer with a boost or a bonus every single day. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. On Sunday, new customers got $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. And returning customers, we got a 30% profit boost on same game parlays. There was also a Sunday night live reward stack during the Red Sox and Yankees contest. So head over to FanDuel.com. Start making the most out of your summer with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listen, your first view today and every day. Everydayers, thanks for coming through on a regular basis like you do. Make sure you come back tomorrow. We'll have another position group, another breakdown, talking about the depth of the roster, talking about where we can see some improvement, and we'll always kind of come up with a little random scenario to talk about. In this one, we're talking about Jamin Davis contributing to the defensive line, something we talked about before, but something we're going to talk about a little bit more in this context. In the meantime, if you need more sports coverage, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every single day to bring you the biggest stories, can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, all streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Continuing now with our conversation about the defensive line group, and this is where we're going to get into a little bit of a nuance, right? We kind of talked about the creativity that Joe Whitt Jr. could have up front, and kind of the history of the defense he's coached in, how many down linemen we might see because of those trends, and then kind of how that opens up the door to other things. We're going to start getting into how those doors start to open here. But first and foremost, racking and stacking interior defensive linemen. We're not going to go too deep into here because, again, I think the pecking order is fairly solid. Like Johnny Newton, we're all kind of penciling him in there third. He's a second-round pick, so if he's healthy and if he's living up to the billing, then you obviously put him in that category. Now, if he's not healthy, then things get a little bit more interesting with whether it's going to be Fedarian Mathis, John Ridgway, Benning Potsai then comes into that story as maybe a fourth defensive tackle, those types of things. So when you're evaluating interior defensive linemen, this is kind of the things we're going to be looking for during training camp, preseason, and all season long. You're looking at three things specifically: how do they operate versus front side blocks, how they operate versus backside blocks, and how they operate as a pass rusher. So front side blocks, we're talking about plays that come right at the defender, whoever you're talking about. If they're double teamed, you're looking to see if they can split the double team, shed the double team, separate from the blockers, make the play, or at least make a play that helps the team make the ultimate play. Backside blocks, you're talking about when the play is going away from the specific defender. How's their chase down ability? How's their cut block awareness? How's their athleticism to get away from those cut blocks and avoid them altogether? Lateral movement. And then, of course, how do they make tackles when they're in pursuit that way, when they do get the opportunity to? And, of course, as a pass rusher, you love seeing guys get sacks, right? But it's not just about the sacks. It's also about creating pressure. Identifying screens has become a very big part of being an interior defensive lineman. Getting off those blocks, getting off those offensive linemen, and chasing down the receiver or getting in the throwing lane once you identify those screen passes. And so for this, we kind of come away with a pecking order right now of Jonathan Allen, Daron Payne, John Ridgway. I'm actually putting third, and I'm putting Benning Potsai fourth because the ability that he has over Fedarian Mathis, who have got fifth right now, is availability. And to me, and not just to me, but to everybody, right? It's the biggest ability you can possibly have. Need to see Fedarian Mathis be able to stay healthy again. Not really his fault. Like you can't say a guy, oh man, I can't believe you tore your ACL. What's wrong with you? Like you can't really do that, but it is an unfortunate part of what has happened with Fedarian Mathis's time in the National Football League. And then you got to put Johnny Newton last just because we haven't seen him do it in the NFL, right? So that's just being fair. But I did go back and I watched the tape of Johnny Newton back in Illinois because I wanted to get some Johnny Newton refreshment here. I wanted to talk about Johnny Newton on this episode and what he could possibly bring. And again, if you're Googling him, Jer'Zhan Newton, Jer'Zhan Newton is the name you're probably going to need to Google. So if you're not finding a lot of Johnny Newton stuff, but that's kind of what he goes by. So I turned the tape on of last year's game against the Wisconsin Badgers for the Illinois Fighting Illini Insiders. I sent you a copy of the video that I got my hands on, the cut up that I was able to watch. And this game is near the end of October. Remember, his first foot injury that needed surgery, he suffered that mid-season of last year. We don't exactly know when, but October 21st, right around that mid-season mark. So it's a very real possibility he was performing in this game with that foot injury that needed surgery. And overall, what you see from him is a high motor. He wins with speed, occasionally with power, great balance. That was kind of one of the things that really stood out to me from Johnny Newton. One of the things I remember from watching him post-draft. I didn't watch a lot of him pre-draft, I'll be honest, but post-draft, watch a good amount about him. Great balance. Rarely do you see this dude on the ground when it's not something that he wants to be, or it's not a situation where he wants to be on the ground. And when Johnny Newton is facing front side blocks in college, he knows how to manipulate those double teams. He knows how to split the blockers and disengage. Also, against solo blockers, he'll toss them to the side. And I can't remember how many times I saw Johnny Newton just grab, extend, rip a dude past him, and just throw the blocker to the side. When washed, because everybody gets washed from time to time, oftentimes he'll actually look to steer his guy into the way of the play or delay getting washed out to kind of clog that hole a little bit longer. Backside blocks, he shows good awareness on those backside blocks. He looks like he knows kind of what the scheme is trying to do against him, how he can counter that to impact the play. Doesn't tend to over pursue, which is great. Gets down the line well, good effort though, and he's always ready to make a tackle. Sometimes you see that dude ball carries just suddenly in your face, and he's never caught by surprise. Pass rush ability on tape. Johnny Newton shows a good feel for sniffing out quick perimeter passes and screens. Doesn't get caught over pursuing much. Again, interesting hesitation move that he's kind of developed sometimes where the ball will be snapped. It's kind of an obvious pass situation. He'll kind of let the offensive lineman get into their pass set a little bit of a hezzy from him. And then he kind of uses that space to really use his speed, use his hand movement and hand operations to get away from the blocks. I watched one rep, guys, specifically insiders. Again, if you go through that tape, it's about a 15-minute cut up from the Wisconsin game. If you go through and watch it, you'll probably find it. Dude shed 2 blocks. He shed his blocker, moved vertically up the field, then up the field, hit another blocker, shed that dude, and then got through to get a sack on the quarterback. I mean, that's just textbook interior defensive line play, guys. So a lot of good stuff from Johnny Newton on tape to help with the defensive line group, but you need more than just the interior defensive line, right? The defensive line also consists of the edge rushers, and this is where things get interesting, right? Down linemen, standing up, all these things. You got different classifications, whatever. We're talking edges here. Dorrance Armstrong Jr., Cleveland Farrell, Dante Fowler Jr., KJ Henry, F.A. Obata, Andre Jones Jr., Javonte Jean-Baptiste, the 7th-round draft pick from this year's class. Those are the guys I give a fighting chance to make the roster. It's a lot of names, a lot of talent. Not all edges are the same. So we're going to break down where each of these guys stands out, how we want to evaluate each of these guys moving forward, and how this Joe Whitt Jr. defense might utilize them in his creativity with his 2 or 3 down linemen next to them. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Passion, drive, and patience is what brings Lombardi trophies to towns like Washington, D.C., but eBay Motors also knows it's what keeps your ride or die vehicle alive. Today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by eBay Motors, and eBay Motors has everything that you're going to need to maintain your vehicle, but they also have everything you need to level it up to peak performance. They've got superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. If you're looking for speed for your car, power for your engine, or style for your vehicle, it doesn't matter. eBay Motors has got you covered with whatever you're looking for. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you're always going to find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you'll get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're going to burn rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, we're talking about the defensive line group. We talked about Joe Whitt Jr.'s scheme history, where he's come from, how it might impact the way that this defense is going to look on the field, the interior defensive line, how they might look, the tandems that Joe Whitt Jr. could possibly use. And now that's going to bleed into how the edges get used. We're going to talk about those guys because, again, not all edges are the same. I think you got a kind of a 3-and-3 split. Javonte Jean-Baptiste, a little bit of an unknown as a rookie. Again, we know what he did in college. What is he going to be able to do in the NFL? That's what we got to figure out. But you got some other guys who have a little bit of a history, right? Dorrance Armstrong, Dante Fowler, KJ Henry, more pass rusher types, Cleveland Farrell, F.A. Obata, Andre Jones Jr., more run stopper types. And that doesn't, I'm not trying to pigeonhole anybody and say, well, KJ Henry can't run stop, so Andre Jones can't pass rush. Like, I'm not saying that at all. Just if you have to tip their scales one way or the other, I think that's kind of where you would put them. But either way, when you're evaluating these edge rushers, right? And today's edge world is really interesting because you're talking about defensive ends, talking about stand-up outside linebackers. And really, at the end of the day, their job is really the same. It's just a matter of how they stand or how their stance is, how they're employed. And a lot of times you see the guys who stand up get used a little bit more creatively than the guys who started with their hand in the dirt. But either way, whether it's a down lineman defensive end you're watching or a stand-up outside linebacker, first thing you're going to look for is their get off. How do they get off the line of scrimmage when the ball is snapped? Are they the last guy moving? Are they one of the first guys moving? The best of the best have great anticipation and really know how to time things, really pick up on some of these cues. You would hate to play poker with them because they're probably going to figure you out. After the get off, inside counters, every offensive lineman is taught, don't give up the outs or don't give up the inside. If you're going to give something up, give up the outside. Don't give up the inside, because the inside is the fastest way to the quarterback. So where does every pass rusher want to go? To the inside. But they know that they're going to try to hyperly protect the inside. So how do you set it up to where you can get that inside access? That is a big thing for the best pass rushers in the NFL. Down lineman edges have a lot of the same criteria for evaluation as interior defensive line, but you want more bend and athleticism in the pass rush when possible. For stand-up edge defenders, outside linebackers, whatever you want to call them, for example, Dorrance Armstrong last year played 435 snaps on the line of scrimmage. 128 of those came as a wide right end, so wide 9 technique on the right side of the line. 70 came on the opposite side, same thing, wide 9 on the left side. 27 snaps came as a left outside linebacker, 96 as a right outside linebacker. What's the difference? Really, nothing other than for the ones that are outside linebacker, he's probably standing up. For the ones where he's a defensive end, his hand is in the dirt. Now, there are different nuances to playing the position, standing up, playing him hand in the dirt. A lot of guys are more comfortable standing up. Chase Young, you would see kind of at one point notoriously would stand up all the time, even though Jack Del Rio and Ron Rivera basically coached hand in the dirt, traditional 4-3 type of defensive end. But Chase clearly felt more comfortable, more explosive standing up. So that's what he did. And those reps, PFF would chart that, quote unquote, as an outside linebacker. So again, the job is largely the same in 3 phases of play for defensive end, edge defender, outside linebacker, whatever you want to call it. Run defense, quickness and movement, and pass rush. Point of attack, run defense, read block sheds, or shed blocks, block shedding, and tackling. Those are the 3 things you need to do really well in run defense. For me, the best, when I stack and rack these defensive ends, edge defenders, whatever you want to call them. And again, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, not a lot of practice. He was banged up, so wasn't able to perform throughout the entirety of minicamp. Very frustrating for him. So he's going to come in last year just because we don't have a lot of body of work to go off of here. But point of attack, run defense, I think Dorrance Armstrong Jr., probably the best run defender of the edge group, even though Clelin Ferrell, who's my number 2 guy, that's kind of more his specialty, but I still think he's a notch below. F.A. Obata, I've got 3rd out of the group. Dante Fowler Jr., 4th. Andre Jones Jr., 5th. KJ Henry coming in just before the rookie. Second phase of defensive end edge play that you want to look for, quickness and movement and recognition. Think click and close, right? When you hear the phrase click and close, a lot of times that refers to off-ball linebackers, but it refers here to find the ball, get the ball, make the play that you need to play to help your team, but also don't get sucked in on play actions. Again, I think Dorrance Armstrong Jr. is going to lead the pack that way. Dante Fowler Jr. 2nd, KJ Henry 3rd, Clelin Ferrell 4th, Andre Jones Jr. I've got 5th, F.A. Obata behind them, and then Javonte Jean-Baptiste. And pass rushers, you got to win one-on-one, split the gaps on double teams. Stunting ability, twisting ability is incredibly important, especially with creative defensive coordinators like we expect Joe Whitt Jr. to be. I think Dorrance Armstrong, again, leads the group there. Fowler is going to come in after him. KJ Henry, followed by Ferrell, F.A. Obata, Andre Jones Jr., rounding out the group. So that's kind of where I rack and stack them. So for me, when I do that and I kind of look at the history of Joe Whitt Jr., where he comes from, I think the most common defensive line grouping you're going to see, Jonathan Allen, Daron Payne, Dorrance Armstrong Jr., and then a combination of Dante Fowler Jr., Clelin Ferrell, depending on the context, depending on the situation. That's 4 guys. But remember, we talked about at the beginning, you're only going to see 2 or 3 with their hand in the dirt, and that's where the creativity comes in. You might see John Allen, Daron Payne with their hand in the dirt. Dorrance Armstrong Jr., Dante Fowler are going to be out there standing up. So again, they would be charted, quote unquote, as outside linebackers, 2 down linemen, right? That's the kind of the nuance here in evaluations and all those things. But you would have 4 guys on the line of scrimmage. Of course, you've also got linebacker, who is listed as an off-ball linebacker, Jamin Davis, who we anticipate lining up as a defensive end, outside linebacker, especially in looks against 12 personnel, right? For example, there, Joe Whitt Jr. could decide to put Dorrance Armstrong as a right end, if he's standing up, right outside linebacker, right defensive tackle, Daron Payne, left defensive tackle, Jonathan Allen, left end, Dante Fowler Jr. or Clelin Ferrell, and then right outside linebacker, Jamin Davis. You could put Armstrong and then Davis on the same side. I feel you could put Armstrong on one side, put Jamin Davis on the left side behind Fowler or Ferrell. and really kind of try to confuse things. You end up with 5 guys on the line of scrimmage. You might rush 4, you might rush 5, hell, you might rush 6, depending on the game flow and the scenario. And then you still got room for 2 linebackers, 2 corners, 2 safeties, or you turn that to 1 linebacker, 3 corners with a nickel and Mike Sanders still, and 2 safeties, 2 linebackers, 3 corners, and 1 safety. I mean, there's just so many different things that Joe Whitt Jr. can do. And a lot of it, again, really trickles down from the fact that you're only going to have 2 or 3 down linemen on every given snap. And from there, it really gives you a lot of flexibility in 11 personnel zone, single high coverage. You can do a lot of different things against a lot of different offenses. So that's our look at the defensive line group. Again, I can't sit here and tell you exactly what it's going to look like in the season, but that's part of the fun of evaluating this unit here in the early part of the summer. That's going to do it for today's episode. Come back tomorrow. Our next episode, we'll dive into another position group, just like we have been here the last couple of weeks as we climb ever closer to training camp. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments, you can leave them in the YouTube comment section or text me directly by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Don't forget, make sure you also check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 live streaming sports channel on YouTube. And as always, I do want to thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listener, first view today, every day. And I do want to thank all the everydayers, of course, for your support. But everydayers, you hear me every day at the end of these episodes. Wish you guys safeness, kindness, and look forward to seeing you all and hearing from you all again the next time we talk. And I'm going to do that today as well. But today it's a little bit more poignant. So over the weekend, it's not Washington Commanders news, so forgive me, but it is 3 individuals from Upper Marlboro, Maryland, which is, of course, in the DMV area. And, the most famous name, Kyrie Jackson, Minnesota Vikings rookie cornerback, was coming out of Oregon. Every day, as you know, we talked about him. We talked about potentially being a Washington Commanders target in the NFL draft. He ended up going 4th round to the Minnesota Vikings. Was enjoying his break between training camp and minicamp and training camp. And unfortunately, just a tragic accident. And not only Kyrie, but Isaiah Hazel, Anthony Litton Jr., again, 3 former high school teammates, all guys who played for big time programs, college football. Kyrie Jackson, obviously probably the brightest NFL future of the 3, but bottom line, all 3 of these young men had futures ahead of them that certainly could have been bright, and now they've been cut short, unfortunately. And again, details are still coming out. I don't want to jump to too many conclusions, but I know there are people in this area. I know of people in this area who know the individuals, the families, and they're hurting right now. So when I wish you guys safety, when I wish you guys kindness, I mean it. It's tough whenever these kinds of things happen. And again, I know it's not Commanders related, but I couldn't let this episode come to an end without saying something about it. And to wish you all, as we always do, until we speak again, if you're out, please be safe, be kind. And we will see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.